Let's see if we turn up live on YouTube. Still says waiting
Oh,
for
something's
me.
happening. Something's
Is
happening.
is there something happening?
Oh, I see you. There we go.
Oh, you see me, but there's no you.
Okay, let me oh, sorry. I
You,
think my camera was off.
you gotta add yourself. Come on.
Whoa, wait, no, no,
I don't
no.
know how it works,
My
huh?
I just turned my camera on.
Okay, that's a good start.
Okay, I just see you though.
Yeah, I don't know how this thing works. Oh yeah, I see you here now, but how do I get you? Oh, I have to click you for you to get on. Present to no, what? How
Yeah,
does this thing work? But how do I
there we go.
but does it switch between me and you or I control that? Like,
Yeah, yeah, I think you control that.
is it not automatic? I have to
Oh well,
like
that's fine. That's fine. Yeah,
I
that's
have
fine.
to
You
VJ
have control over the conversation.
I have to VJ this like uh, okay, well, that's fine. At least something is working. So yeah, where do we start? Where did this come from? It came from like I saw a lot of vitriol towards you because of your Bitcoin statements. I think that's kind of when I reached out. So
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, when we were when we were enemies or when we were competing factions, I thought you were a fake account.
oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
don't worry, you're not the only person. Because like someone was saying, like, this account knows too much about Bitcoin. It must be like
yeah.
a
But
guy
then
or something.
but here's the thing.
Yeah.
It's the interesting thing is that like I think when you have the financial incentive and somebody um is threatening your financial incentive,
Mm-hmm.
your mind will start making things up to validate your position. So, like, the immediate thing is you're a paid shill or you're a fake account.
I always hear that. I'm sure you
Yeah.
hear that now too,
Yeah, no,
right?
no, no, no. So then the thing was that when I was in hardcore in the BTC camp, I saw all these random people coming out of nowhere in the BCH camp, and I'm like,
Right,
"Who are you? Like, you've never like been here." And then like they all sound like really knowledgeable, but then like
right.
like you and like Tweety Birdbrain, like you're like women. And the thing is that we're all like, oh, we're not really into identity politics. We're all about objective argumentation and like you know just looking at the substance of the thing. But then the first thing we go to is ad hominem to where, oh, you're a girl or something that you shouldn't know this much or something.
Mm.
You're like a you're a fake account. You're like some engineer that's that's pretending to be a girl
Yeah,
online
I've
and
heard
stuff.
I was like 4 guys at a time on an account, so that was the most funny.
Yeah, yeah. So that was the perception of me of you when I was in the Bitcoin, the BTC camp. And then the minute that I said that I am more supportive of BSV's roadmap from an economic uh, incentive standpoint, long term sustainability standpoint,
Mm.
people immediately, without any proof, accused me of being paid by Craig.
Right, so you kind of know how it feels like now when people just come out to randomly accuse you of stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, there's like no proof whatsoever, and you think that's strange. But then again, when I was in their shoes, I accused you guys of being paid or fake accounts as well
Mm.
without any proof. And it's yeah, it's very fascinating being able to put yourselves in the shoes of like the attacker and the attackee based on your financial incentives. And I think it speaks a lot to just like human nature in general. When you decide somebody's an enemy, then you'll start making things up about them.
Right. Yeah, and the people, they kind of turn on you so quickly, because I was watching at some point where they're like, oh, you're kind of like neutral and fair and stuff like that. And then the
Yeah.
instant, you said the BSV, I support BSV, and they're just like totally turn on you. I was like, no, this guy is a shill. Like they've been following me for months or something, and then suddenly you're a shill. Like,
yeah, it's like I've literally had like, physical threats against me for attacking shitcoins and protecting BTC.
right.
And I'm like, I didn't do that just for fun. Like, I really like believe that. Like, I don't find like getting threatened, by random people on the internet fun. And then, yeah, so that kind of shows, kind of like, skin in the game that I'm actually exposing myself to risk to, support my position. And then once I'm no longer, on your same team, all that is thrown away, and I'm now an enemy, and I'm a scammer or a paid shill.
Yeah, and we feel this a lot on like BSV also, because once we like the whole BCH thing where they like fork off with their
so you guys kind of experienced the same thing, because you guys were a united tribe.
Yeah.
And then once you broke off, all these people that you used to be friends and allies with, they all turned into either, well, I don't know if you accuse them of being scammers or shills. It sounds like you just assume them of being like well, no, I mean, you would assume that, you're paid by Bitmain. Well, some people are literally
paid by Bitmain.
Or paid. So that's not a false accusation. Or you could just say that they're incompetent, which I think that you're probably, well, no, I think that's fair. That, if I think I've seen you're pretty fair in your criticisms, where you have actually evidence to back up.
Right. Yeah. I'm like harsh, but I have backing, proof behind, why I say certain things. But I think with the kind of BCH BSV thing, it's kind of like there was always something, like a schism between the people, because there were like these hardcore anarchists and then these like hardcore pro-law people that eventually it was going to, split away. I think the strength of Bitcoin is that actually you can always split, if you disagree with something, it becomes like another branch. Like, so we can be like the hardcore fundamentalists, like, okay, Satoshi's design was correct. And then someone else is like, oh no, Satoshi's design was wrong. We're going to try something else. But then, like eventually we're going to have something's going to be like the strongest branch of Bitcoin. And I believe that like totally to be the one that Satoshi designed. And that's why I'm behind like what they're doing on BSV and the scaling that they're doing. So
yeah. So before I respond that, it's kind of hard to see you.
I'm sorry. It's a little bit dark.
A lighting issue?
Do you want it a bit brighter, or is it like
just for the viewers, like
how difficult is it? I guess I could put on a light, but I mean I'm trying to go to sleep soon also, so like I'm trying to balance.
So
yeah.
All right, so do you want to just have this to be like our practice run, and then we could delete this, and then since we figured this out, we'll do it.
Like, let's do it. People watching, so I don't mind it. We can have like a part 2 again, but I think it's nice to just chat also. Like, people know it's not pre-scripted. We're just basically chatting about like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then, I mean, I agree with you. I think Daniel Krawitz, he's like always like one of the first like people to come to these epiphanies, and the thing is that like he's usually always first, so I think that's why he gets a lot of criticism.
Yeah.
But then he's like, here's the interesting thing. Well, this is a tangent, but like the way that you kind of tell if somebody is just like somebody who's thinking independently and someone who's just a follower. Followers just repeats arguments that the authorities have like condoned. It's just like, oh, store of value, or like small blocks to allow nodes to download the blockchain or whatever. The thing is that they never have any unique insights of their own. They just repeat the orthodox opinion, whereas people that are actually independent thinkers are actually know what they're talking about. They have ideas that make sense, that are original, that nobody else has, because they're thinking on their own and they're coming up with these things on their own. So like I just like following Craig's Twitter, or like following like Daniel, like they have these constant new epiphanies about things that nobody else has. That means that they understand things at a fundamental level, and they can come up with these new epiphanies. Whereas I look at people in like the BTC camp, the Ethereum camp, the Ripple camp, the Litecoin camp. They all say the same things over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So it's not anybody. It's not a group of people that are independently thinking and independently adding their own value. It's basically, kind of like a cult, or kind of like an army, to where the general or the leader gives commands, and then everybody blindly follows the command, and they just try to get strength in numbers, and they just constantly say the same thing. And I think Daniel speaks about this as well. He's like, well, if you want a kind of a productive community, if everybody is doing and saying the same thing, how can that community be creative or productive?
No, they're definitely not creative, and there's something to be said about the word cult. I know it's like for a lot of people that feels like a slur. For some of those communities you mentioned, it feels like a slur too, but they don't realize that they're not like independently thinking. They just go for these like kind of like, especially with Tron nowadays, it was all hype. Like it was just born out of hype, and they just didn't have a proper white paper. They just like plagiarized it from somewhere, and then somehow like it gained a lot of following, and they actually started to do it backwards. Like they just got a lot of funding, and they started to try to do stuff with that funding. But I mean, I think the difficulty is like when groups start labeling each other cults, like the thing they don't understand is that it feels like very much like a personal attack to them, which is why they shut down, and then they keep inside those groups even more. So you can notice that if you try to argue with like Ripple person, or like a Dash person about like stuff that's wrong with the system, they can get like super offended, especially if you start off by saying they're like XRP shill or something, even though they call themselves XRP army. So there's kind of like this like mob mentality to it anyway, but they don't really realize this much themselves. And I think to take a step back, this is what's happening with BTC, and also BSV and stuff like that too, is that the understanding is that they feel very tribalistic, and they can't see like the stuff that's happening on the other side. So they don't even want to look at what's being built on BSV. They just want to say, oh, that's like fake Toshi and their cult or whatever, and they don't even read what you're doing. They don't read about what we're doing with op return and stuff like that, which is very tragic. I mean, if you're thinking about Bitcoin as a community, it's very tragic when you just toss out like all the stuff cool that's actually happening, and just obsessed with your own group, just to say, okay, I'm a BTC person, I don't care about like actually what's being built on Bitcoin. That's crazy to me.
Yeah. It's because like maintaining the narrative is more important than finding the truth and finding ways to be productive and to add value. But I mean, as harsh as I am on that, I realize that I succumb to that type of behavior as well.
Mm.
Like, for example, being in the BTC camp, I was very critical of Ethereum.
Yep.
Right. Where in reality, I think there's like a lot of fundamental issues on there on them that will not allow them to like be long-term successful.
Yep.
But it seems like they did have some features that people enjoy building or using to build.
Right.
So, for example, I invested in Gab's crowdfunding, and they were going to use a ERC20 token. And then I invested in this new protocol called Urbit, and they're using the Ethereum blockchain for their public key infrastructure. So that gave me a cognitive dissonance. It's like, well, people outside of Ethereum are using Ethereum, and I'm investing, and I'm also benefiting off of it. So maybe Ethereum's not complete shit. But before that, like if anything, Ethereum related, I would say, oh, this is stupid, or this is a scam. I'm not going to look into it. Or like, somebody would like a blog post or whatever, and like, I'm not going to look into it, because as a BTC maximalist, I have no incentive to entertain things that they're doing, because that would just take away attention from BTC. It's very comforting just to say that everything they're doing is fake. But when the reality is that I'm actually using something on Ethereum, then that contradicts my my view. So I guess let's segue into like how I became interested in, well, Bitcoin forks and then BSV. So I listened to Daniel when he said, hold all forks, and I think from him, it was just a economic incentive perspective, to where he said that the investors should be the kings or the emperors, or people should serve the investors. And when I thought about that, I was like, no, they shouldn't serve the investors, because the developers know everything, and without the developers, there is no Bitcoin. But then I thought about another contradiction, was that I always criticize Ethereum for worshiping, Vitalik, and not worshiping themselves, or what they need. And I was like, well, Vitalik doesn't know everything, so then you shouldn't outsource all your thinking to him. You should think for yourself, and speak up when you think the developers aren't doing the right thing. So by holding all forks, you force the developers to compete for you. And then with that, you reduce, single point of failure risk. So if you have Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin competing for, investor dollars, then they kind of lose their leverage and their power, and they have to do what the market wants them to do. So if the market doesn't like, small blocks, then these developers are going to get punished. But then in order for them to get punished, you have to have an alternative, a competing fork to So it's interesting. I used to be an Uber driver, and then I used to recruit drivers and stuff like that. And a lot of them said, it's like, I drive for Uber or I drive for Lyft. And I'm like, no, you want to drive for both. Because as an independent contractor, and they'll complain about, one side or the other. And I was like, well, as an independent contractor, you want to drive for both and have them both compete for you as a driver to give you, the best features and the best the payment structure and whatnot.
Right, like when you can shift easily or segue into something else, then it makes that business realize, oh, okay, I need to do something to have your business. So, as a user, it's very strong to keep in mind that you should. Well, for me, I don't hold all forks because I'm just very certain of some things that are not gonna scale, and that the thing you mentioned before about like people having this conception of maximalism and saying that, okay, like I'm gonna ignore all the Ethereum projects and stuff like that. For me, it's opposite. Like, so last year, like when it was very kind of like there was a lot of enthusiasm and energy around blockchain, like just every single like thing that people were doing there. Like Ethereum had a lot of energy around like developing games and apps and like all kinds of different things on Ethereum. Like the problem with that was just that Ethereum can't scale. The problem wasn't the app developers or like those people we all want to keep, and we want them actually on Bitcoin, like a Bitcoin chain, because it can scale, and that's like BSV for me. And so like I want to keep all that energy, and I don't hate any developers or being on the wrong chain or something. I just want them to know that, okay, do you want to be on a chain that's like a dead end, or do you want to be on a chain that's going to scale? And BSV is proving to scale. I mean, it's proving to scale because it's just following what Satoshi said would work, which is just like increase the block size. We've had no problem with like increasing the block size, despite everything that on the BTC crowd is like the scary thing of like, oh, it's gonna lose its like decentralization and like that, all kinds of like kind of crackpot things, because at some point that they have to increase their block size unless they don't want people to use it, unless they don't want a system that can be used. So like for me, it's like about eliminating all the alternatives, like where like a chain just doesn't work, it just has a limit. Ethereum, I can use it now because not many people use it, and that's fine, but like when we get to a worldwide sale, that's not going to work. So why would I even invest in it now? Like, why would I even do anything on it now? That's what I want developers to like consider and think for themselves. Why am I doing it for this thing when I could be building it for something that's gonna basically scale forever? They don't have to change like what they're doing. They don't have to like recode the whole thing. Like, I mean, it's gonna support it.
I'll probably address why they're reluctant to do that, because there's this thing I think that happens in Ethereum to where the investors and the developers and the users are all the same people. So they hold Ethereum, and then they have their blinders on, then they'll only build on Ethereum, right?
Yeah,
because they're trying to
I think the problem. You first.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, they're trying to invest in, align their interests and increase the value of their own investment by, building things on top of Ethereum. So I think unless they dump their Ethereum or they lose a lot of money, their mind won't be open to moving on to a competing chain, because that would give them cognitive dissonance about their investment, right? But to your larger point, I think Daniel again brought up a good point about this, is that as a economic platform of what Bitcoin is, it doesn't make any sense to exclude people. You want to be inclusive because you want 5 billion people using your blockchain, right? So then you can't start saying, oh, you're a you're a
not an anarchist, you can't use that.
You're not. You're not a
you're not a nerd, so you can't use our chain.
No.
You don't know how to use like this.
So you're not an anarchist, or you're not a Austrian. I think that's kind of the main one. You're not a Austrian economist, so you can't kind of use this chain. But I'm like, well, what is the addressable market for anarchists and like Austrian? I'm like, it's not a very it's not a very big market. And I made this tweet about like, be careful of Bitcoin maximalists that make majority of their money shilling like $500 steak dinners and like
Right.
conferences.
Uh-huh.
Because I think what they're really doing is they're selling themselves as a
Right.
celebrity
Yeah, they're
and
not
not
maximalist
selling.
at all.
Yeah,
There's
it's
nothing
like
maximalist about them. So like,
yeah. So it's becoming this kind of thing to where there's like a hierarchy or a priesthood, and it's not about adding value for the most building things that add value for the most amount of people in the world. It's about being at the top of this hierarchy, and then
right.
once you're known as the top of the hierarchy, then you could start selling $100 steak dinners and conferences that will people come to meet you. And I was like, what the heck does that have to do with Bitcoin? That has nothing to do with Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
So it's and I think that's what happens when there is no positive productivity creation that's happening, is that there is a zero or a limited amount of value to go around. There's zero sum. So you just fight to be at the top of it. It's kind of like a dictatorship, right? Or like a corrupt, nation state, to where, there's no rule of law, there is no protection of property rights, so people can't come and provide value. And what happens is that people just fight to extort and expropriate resources and money at the top, and it's just constantly, dictators just overthrowing one another just to expropriate money from the country.
Right.
To where if you have like a functioning government in a functioning democracy, your goal is to attract creative value adding people to your country and allow them to create value and sell things to the rest of the world, and that increases the value of your country's currency and tax revenues and whatnot, right? So you want to attract the most talented people to build businesses in your country. So same thing with block. So I think I had this other unique insights where blockchains are more like governments than they are companies. So I think the problem is that a lot of people are trying to run their blockchain like a company, to where there's like an executive team, like the core developers, and they dictate all the changes and all the rules and whatnot. But that's not what a blockchain is. A blockchain is an economic platform to where you have these rules that are set, that are predictable. And then once those rules are set and predictable, and that people aren't going to change the rules out from under you, then they have the long-term incentive to build on top of your thing. And it's the people building on top of it that's adding value. It's not the developers, the protocol developers themselves that add value. They just set the rules to make the environment conducive to adding value, which is like predictability and stability and and whatnot.
Yeah, so I think you're highlighting one of the biggest problems with like what was happening with Bitcoin, like 2018 or something, or 2017 when we got BCH, but it was that like the protocol was never fixed. Like there was this idea that there were these core developers, and at some point, they might decide, okay, now we want Mimblewimble, or now we want to build make Bitcoin like a settlement layer and have Lightning Network as where people transact. So there was like never anything constant. Like it wasn't the core idea of what was in the white paper. And so for me, like when we finally got like a BSV, like there was like this very like there was like a sigh of relief. It wasn't like for like this kind of BSV side, I feel it wasn't like, okay, the market has crashed and everything's doomed. It was like, oh, finally we got like kind of like rid of all this, like, oh, let's change the protocol into something unpredictable all the time. It became like, okay, we know what the protocol is because we have this very firm idea about what it is, which is like directly based from the white paper, like direct, like we don't want to change anything. It's just like scaling. You just increase the block size, like revive all the opcodes. It was like a very clear picture of what it will look like. So I think that helps to attract developers because you already know what to expect. It's like an internet protocol. It's gonna be a stable base for building on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what attracted to me because that was my intuition. And then it sounds like, people that are, building, BSV, they understand that. I again, I keep on going back to this country analogy. It's like I see the Bitcoin white paper like the U.S. Constitution, to where the the United States is built on the U.S. Constitution, and then everybody can read it and say, okay, these are the rules that we abide by, and then they purposely make it hard to change the U.S. Constitution because nobody will want to come and build businesses in your country if they know that the rules can arbitrarily be changed. And also it creates a bad incentive to engage, to be the person that can change the rules as opposed to the person that plays by the rules, right? Yeah. So yeah, like, so let's say you're playing a sport like basketball or hockey or something like that. And there, for some whatever reason, there's a opening for you to change the rules to give your team, a better chance at winning. Why would you try to compete fairly? You would just try to constantly change the rules in your favor. And then if people are knowing that the rules are being changed in one team's favor, they're not going to play your game anymore. So that's why it's very important for referees to be fair, and the notion that the referees are objective and fair is very important for competitiveness. So yeah, they're the only ones that kind of like saw that, and like it was interesting that like a lot of people in BCH kind of changed their arguments to match a lot of what BTC was using against them.
Yeah.
So in the original split, they said, miners rule, and you gotta look out for the incentives for the miners, and then BTC said no, like the miners are just they just take our orders and they just process transactions, and the users and the nodes, they matter. And then BSV was consistent in making that argument again, that the miners like matter, and then BCH changed their argument to that. And to me, that tells me that when you are not consistent and you constantly change the rules of the game, it's because you're losing and you want to change the rules to suit you.
Definitely. I think the biggest point that highlighted that was when they were so afraid that they started adding all these extra checkpoints. They were like, oh, let's have rolling checkpoints, like not just some checkpoints. Let's just keep on having checkpoints. Like what the hell?
Yeah, so they were arbitrarily changing the rules because they were losing. And I know this because I always criticize Ethereum and Vitalik for that, to where they had the kind of economic protocol or the rule set out, to which is Coda's law. These are unstoppable applications, and that was kind of like the social agreement of what, or the economic agreement of what Ethereum was about. And then the minute that they themselves lost money, they changed the rules.
Val hack, right?
Yeah, they changed the rules to bail themselves out. And then what happens when you become the group that changes the rules? then that means that you are now the leader or the dictator, or you control this protocol now.
They're not guardians now. They're just like
Yeah.
dictators. They're just
Yeah.
controlling the protocol and saying that I can roll this back any point I want. Like, you
Yeah.
guys are gonna listen to us. And
Yeah.
that's like the most terrible place for developers to be. Developers shouldn't be the ones that are like in charge. Like, it should never be. Like the whole economics of Bitcoin is built around, okay, like miners are providing a service that you need to be inviting to like users by having a competitive price, and they're like fair because they're not, you know, colluding, because they're just all different miners. They're just like, I, like, as a miner, just want people to use this service. Like, we just want people to use Bitcoin. I don't have to collude with anyone for me to be successful. I just need a lot of people using Bitcoin. I just need a lot of transactions to process. So they're the ones who are like, basically they're guardians by just doing what Bitcoin is made to do. Like, they're just following the white paper. Okay, I'm just a miner, basically, you know, like trying to get this, you know, service popular. Like, I can, you know, of course, sponsor some like developers or some competitions or something to be able to get more users and more services that attract users. But I'm not like controlling the protocol in a way, because it's supposed to be set so that the developers can develop on it. So
yeah. I mean, yeah. Again, going back to the metaphors, it's like a sports league or a country, to where it's very important that everybody agrees on the rules. And then once everybody agrees on the rules, the focus is not on fighting over who changes the rules. The focus is on competing according to the rules. So what happens a lot when, you know, the developers impose some arbitrary change that doesn't have consensus, like, you know, a rollback of the DAO or the rolling checkpoint. It's very similar to when, like, a constitutional republic or democracy, they say, oh, we're having an emergency.
Right.
And so then, because we're having a national emergency, we need to suspend the Constitution and to impose things like the Patriot Act or whatever.
Like martial
and
law,
then,
like suddenly, hey.
And it's here, I'm to protect you. But what happens with that is, once you violate the rules, you become the person that can dictate the rules, and you do not relinquish that power. And then you become the de facto, you know, dictator of the thing. And like, the thing with that is, like, for example, Vitalik, like, it seems like Vitalik, or whatever changes that he supports, gets through. And the thing is that I don't have a close relation with Vitalik. I can't read his mind. So how am I expected to build on Ethereum if I can't predict what Vitalik is going to do? So I have an incentive to try to influence him, or to get very close to him. And it shouldn't be that way. That's, you know, that's like, you know, nepotism. It should just be whoever creates the best, you know, app, you know, should be able to, you know, succeed on the platform. So yeah, so I think, you know, long story short is that people are looking at blockchain and Bitcoin protocols as if they're companies, when they're not. They are more like, you know, nation states in which businesses build on top of. And I think that's a fundamental thing that these people don't understand.
Yeah, definitely. So what else did we cover? Someone asked us about Austrian economics. So as a summary, if we could give like a very short intro to what the difference is with like Keynesian economics, for example. Like, just the contrast is, I think, like sound money and free markets. So you're not trying to control the economy in some way or form, like saying, like restricting, okay, you can only trade this much of this or whatever, and just like Bitcoin being a platform for just like a stable base like amount of money. Like, there's not like anything added. or subtracted. It's just,
Mhm.
going to be one fixed supply, and then just letting people, like kind of the free market to decide like how money and trade flows, and Bitcoin being the perfect system for letting those trades flow, because like it can be, like fractional like amounts of money, like the very small amounts compared to what
Yeah.
we use in fiat now, and it
Yeah.
can be wide like instantly. So this is kind
Yeah.
of like
So here's the thing. Like, I'm more for like empiricism than I am for ideology. I think ideology isn't helpful because it creates that religious kind of tribal priesthood behavior to where it's all about who's more pure to an argument. My thing is like I'm very like in the camp of like just like very practical people like Deng Xiaoping or like Lee Kuan Yew or whatever, where they're just like, I don't really have an ideology, but all I know is it's not working. And we need to look to other things that are working, right? So I think the argument about kind of sound money, or I think it's more a predictable emission or predictable growth in the money supply. I think it goes back to the same thing that we're talking about the importance of everybody agreeing on the rules and not creating incentive to change the rules. So I think, same thing with, we're talking about, a government and a constitution that the rules don't change much, or in a sports league, the rules don't change much, or in a blockchain, the rules don't change much. I think when it comes to monetary policy, that the rules shouldn't change much.
Right.
Right. So the
Yeah.
thing is that if we say that, okay, this currency emission schedule is locked in and we can't change it anymore,
Right. And the cap
then
also, like,
so then the
yeah.
incentive goes from trying to control the protocol and the emission schedule and to saying, okay, I can't control the amount of money that's printed, so I can just focus on using the money, or just using the money. Because what happens is that if you do have control over how much money can be created, then you will just create more money for yourself, right? And that's what you see with all these shitcoins, is that basically they're doing what nation states like Venezuela are doing. They don't want to do work, so they just create another shitcoin just to pump and dump money, and then they just dump it for Bitcoin or whatever when it gets worthless. So it's like kind of shitcoins are kind of hyperinflating. So I think that's another important thing. Like, it's one thing to talk about like what different ideologies are, but I think it's if you can really understand, if you can really explain the reasoning for the ideology, it's better. So so then the whole thing about sound money and whatnot, I think it's the most important is just to not create bad incentives and rent-seeking behavior, to focus people on creating wealth by adding valuable services and products and innovation to the economy, as opposed to generating wealth by arbitrarily printing money. I think that's the main thing. So like, people are like, the Bitcoin supply is 21 million. Like, it doesn't really matter what the final supply is or the emission schedule is. It matters that it's predictable and it can't be changed. I think Milton Friedman said that it's better just to leave monetary policy to a computer. So then, people don't fight over it, and you just decide on, one rule. And the most part, it doesn't really matter what the schedule is. It's just that it's predictable and people can't change it. I do wonder about the whole limited supply thing. And see, this is a healthy thing, because in BTC you cannot question that. Right? So then, I mean, let's just entertain the thought that a limited supply isn't a good thing. Because I read one guy, I think his name is Rothbard's Disciple or something. He actually criticizes BSV and Craig for having a limited supply. He says it creates rent-seeking behavior, and if you're early, then you can just sit on your coins and not doing anything. Whereas having a unlimited cap, but a regular emission schedule incentivizes you to spend and to build, as opposed to just hold or hoard. What do you, have you thought about that much?
Yeah, I think people have talked about that quite a bit. Like I think the interesting thing is that like the value of money changes, because if you keep having a schedule of new money, it basically, I mean, it devalues everyone's money kind of equally, I guess. Like, I mean, but like the thing with having a fixed supply is like you don't need to devalue money, because then you like the always the people, like the reason why we don't want it in the system that we have now is because we have, you know, the central banks and the people who actually issue the money, they're the ones who get the kind of bonus of printing money, because they're basically the ones spending it. Yeah, in Bitcoin system, yeah, I don't know if it would be that like terrible that, you know, like miners, you know, get like kind of fresh supply, but I don't think it's actually needed. I think it's like as a limited supply that like really makes more sense. Like you said, like the Constitution, like do you add some rule later to the Constitution, or do you just accept the Constitution as it is, because that's what people signed up for and that's what people will understand. Like the thing with holding, like holding doesn't last forever. You can have like, you know, one generation of people who, okay, only Satoshi really has like a lot of coins. I mean, there are other early holders, but I don't think it lasts for like generations and generations of their family. It's just gonna last for, you know, their generation and maybe the next or something. Of course, eventually you run out of money if you keep spending it. So it's more like getting rid of the current, you know, Federal Reserve System, where there's just one kind of private corporation responsible for printing money, and they get all the benefits of printing it. Like, it doesn't cost them anything. They're lending it out back to the government and they're getting interest from it. So there's no situation like that in Bitcoin, like with the limited supply and the schedule it has now. So that problem is eliminated. And I don't think there's any problem with people who actually do save money. I mean, that's like your own, you know, like a good, you know, thinking. Just like now, if people save money, there's like it's kind of a virtue to that too. It's not all like hodl forever stuff. It's not like the hodling that we see now, which is like speculative. Like, it's just kind of like, oh, I might get like huge short-term gains like right now because like 2017, you know, like kind of.
Also, let's think about this from the miner incentive perspective, right? So if the block reward subsidy continues in perpetuity, then you don't really need to create a fee market, right? So then you could say that a fee market is a proxy for actual positive economic activity, right? Whereas just relying on the block reward subsidy, that's just making money off of inflation.
Right, like the current block reward subsidy, it's always designed like a system where you kind of attract people who are kind of like the gold miners or the kind of seekers for new like riches, the explorers first, and then like slowly you kind of wean them off that block reward and make them
because
work
the
for
gold miners, they're not really adding any value.
Right. I mean, at the start, kind of, gold itself. Well, gold is kind of bad, kind of comparison, because gold actually has some like intrinsic value, so you use it for some electronics and stuff like that. But like the metaphor is the same. That, you know, you're kind of there's a certain type of person who will take like the early risks, and you need to give like the appropriate reward for that risk. Because the early risk for Bitcoin was like literally nothing. It was like a monopoly money, kind of like a digital monopoly money. And it's like, who's gonna mine this? Like, you need someone who's kind of brave enough to say, hey, one day this might be, actually used, and then it's going to be worth something. When we make this first like value transaction with the pizzas, like at some point, it's going to be a system that's used. So we need to, Satoshi's plan was like amazing, and it just worked. So that's why I have so much faith in, the rest of like everything that like Satoshi has written down, because it all makes sense. They designed a system which attracted people who were just curious. And then it evolved into, hey, actually, let's make this, usable, because I have, like the people who mind it, like I have supply. What am I doing with it? Of course, I want to, start like an economy where I can trade it, like trade it for pizza, trade it for whatever in-game currency or whatever they wanted. And then like it just snowballs from there, because then people realize, oh my god, this is amazing. I can send money in like seconds to the other side of the world. This is like awesome. So we're gonna get more people to use it, and that's the way it should be going. The problem in like 2007, even earlier, was that the block size cap that the core insisted was supposed to stay there, like basically like kind of broke down all this organic like movement and like interest in Bitcoin as a like something to use. Like cafes and like hip cafes in Berlin were using it, and there's all these different, like Steam was using it. There's all these different services that wanted to use Bitcoin because it was just so awesome. And then suddenly it's like, oh great, like the transactions don't get through in like a few hours. That's like insane. I can't like transact like this at a restaurant. I can't do anything with this anymore. Like even Steam doesn't want it. Like that's totally like total madness. But I still see people there supporting BTC. I'm like, oh my god, like what is wrong with you guys? Because if this is unusable, it can't be a global currency if it's unusable.
Yeah. I mean, so I think what happened with Bitcoin was that the kind of the Austrians and the anarchists or libertarians kind of got dictatorial. They became kind of like dictators, to where they said that the kind of only, I mean, and I was guilty of this as well. I believed this, that Bitcoin was like a very limited technology, and we just focus on what it does best, which is store value. And be decentralized and not censor transactions, right? So then basically that narrative kind of took over. Then people allowed the core devs to limit the block size and limit the economic activity on chain. And I think it was just a lot of misunderstandings and miseducation that was going about what Bitcoin was and what it was capable of doing. And but I guess the reason why I don't subscribe to that ideology anymore is because I see a lot of contradictions within the BTC maximalist camp, to where, okay, so this is like an interesting thing. So then when things don't things aren't consistent, I start getting cognitive dissonance. I start questioning the people that aren't being consistent. So I noticed that people in the BSV camp were more Bitcoin maximalist than people in the BTC camp.
Yeah.
To where they hated every other coin other than their coin. And I was like, wait, like, how can we be the real Bitcoin maximalists when these guys like hate all the shitcoiners that Bitcoiners like approve of? So, for example, Litecoin, right?
Right.
I'm like, how can you be a Bitcoin maximalist and support Litecoin? It's basically a clone of Bitcoin, and it's like a top 10 coin. It's like taking up like market cap and
it's the classic one, because the Litecoin acts like a parasite. So like what I did, I went to a bit like a Bitcoin or like kind of hackers conference in 2017, and what they did was like, oh hey, like you can pay with BTC at our conference, or you can use this card where you can load LTC. I'm like, oh my god, what kind of Bitcoin conference are you? Like, why are you even promoting Litecoin? I was like, what the hell?
Yeah, so then the thing was that, and then I just saw like Lee's behavior, and I was just like, it's kind of sketchy. But then they did a promotion, or they did a partnership with the UFC where they advertised Litecoin, and they urged people to pay with Litecoin at a UFC event, and I'm like, well, why wouldn't you pay with Lightning?
Right?
Isn't that
like
supposed to be
Bitcoin? Come on, like
isn't that supposed
Bitcoin at a Bitcoin conference?
Yeah, but then the thing was that Lightning is supposed to be the payments app for Bitcoin, and I'm like, well, Litecoin is encroaching on Bitcoin's network effect.
It has been all the time. It's like a parasite.
And I was calling that out, and then to me, I thought, I was like, yeah, this makes like so much sense. You guys are crazy. Like, how can you be a Bitcoin or Bitcoin maximalist and support Litecoin, who is encroaching on your own use cases? And what I realized was that because the block size are limited, all these use cases have been pushed off of BTC into Litecoins.
Right.
So they're like smart contracts from Ethereum, payments with Litecoin, privacy or anonymity with like Monero and stuff like that.
Right.
They support Ethereum Classic and Ethereum. So basically what happened is that in order for them to cover up for the shortcomings of BTC, they support these BTC friendly Litecoins that are not, they're not trying to, they're not trying to unseat Bitcoin, but they support them because they provide the use cases that were pushed off of the BTC blockchain. And I'm like, so by suppressing the block size, you are pushing value off of Bitcoin and onto these shitcoins. So it's like you're a shitcoiner.
Total sabotage. I mean, it's like if you see it like now as it unfolds, you can see it's like total sabotage to just sabotage, like to cap the block size, because they knew all these things. Like they knew they were gonna like go into Lightning because it's like founded by Blockstream, which also pays for the core developers. So they're like same people. And same with this, like someone saying now Grin is like, okay, it's made by like Andrew Poster, which is one of the core devs also. Like all these kind of things, like they're like, look, you can use this thing because Bitcoin doesn't work now. It's all made by the same people who made Bitcoin not work. So it's like
so basically what Bitcoin has become like a dictatorship, to where basically what's happening is that, like going back to what Daniel said, that we surrendered our power to these developers. And then now they're the ones we worship, not the protocol, and they're the ones that accrue most of the value because they're launching all these shitcoins and making a bunch of money off of it. Like Charlie Lee, like I guess he was getting annoyed of me for like calling him out, and he tried to redefine the term Bitcoin maximalist to somebody that supports Bitcoin but also supports thinks there's a place for shitcoins.
Oh my god!
And then he tried to call somebody who was like only Bitcoin supremacists or Bitcoin extremists. Yeah, and I'm like, you are the head of a shitcoin. How can you call yourself a Bitcoin maximalist? This makes no sense. You guys are crazy.
It makes no sense,
right? He is the leader of a altcoin. It's like Vitalik saying, I'm the leader of Ethereum, but I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. You're like, that doesn't make no sense. It's like saying I work for Samsung, but I love Apple.
But Vitalik doesn't make any. Vitalik also tried that because he was like, "Oh, I'm pro BCH and blah blah blah," and I will go to the Bitcoin.com office and hold their T-shirt and stuff. Like, there's a lot of these people like that because they're trying to just gain, I don't know, some sympathy from all coiners or something to kind of promote this like oh, every coin is okay kind of thing. Like they're not pushing for a worldwide like money system. They're just pushing for, hey, here's my whatever scam
Yeah.
coin, just pay me some more so I can buy out at the all-time high, which is what he did. Like, so how can he talk about maximalist anything? He's not even maximalist his own coin.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one thing I noticed is that, again, going back to the metaphor that blockchains are more like nation states, is that I don't know, I became like a geopolitical nerd lately, and I looked at the different strategies that happen. And there's a strategy to where there's like a global superpower, like the hegemon, and then they dictate the strategy of all the weaker countries. So then when there's a global hegemon like the United States or whatever, your strategy is either to partner with the hegemon, the dominant power.
Right.
So then that's like, Japan and UK, Australia, and whatnot. And then you have weaker states that are higher, or the second tier, and then they partner together to resist the hegemon. So then that's probably like, Russia, China, Iran, and whatnot. And basically it's like, either you're with the powerful, hegemon, or you're against them. And I found that was happening in crypto. So BTC was the hegemon. And then you had the weaker altcoins like Litecoin, Ethereum Classic, and Monero. They were aligned with BTC.
Yeah, they were like BTC friendly. Like they tried to.
Yeah, they were BTC friendly. And then you had like BCH, Ethereum, and like Zcash, and they were like all kind of like friends, and they'd like collaborate as well. And like, Roger Ver said like Ethereum was going to flip in Bitcoin and stuff like that. So then they were basically aligning in order to try to unseat Bitcoin.
Yeah, at least like on the propaganda side, like I don't believe that, the users or all the users or all the developers aligned, but there was some kind of like there's some kind of weird thing that I find about, Bitcoin.com and these Bitmain and all these things, that there's kind of some insider stuff going on, like with them and exchanges, with them and the propaganda. So they're anti-BSV, but they're not anti-Ethereum and stuff like that. So it's basically like you say, it's like geopolitics. They're just choosing like it's just like just China, US, and UK and all kinds of stuff. They're gonna paint the other guy as like the bad guy, and then they have their own like united hegemon, and they're just like, oh, that one is bad. Like
I think Vitalik's is something like like the best time to like resist a dictator is yesterday, and the second best time is today. And then my thing is like, you're the dictator of Ethereum.
Yeah, he's giving us advice about him.
So that's another rule. Anytime like somebody is like vilifying somebody else publicly, they're usually guilty of it themselves, and they're trying to deflect of like their own behavior.
Well, sometimes you call out real evil. I think the real evil was trying to sabotage Bitcoin. This is the first real evil to spawn all these altcoins. Like there wasn't altcoins basically before.
But to be fair, the reasons why these altcoins have value is because they were pushed off of Bitcoin, right?
Right.
Like everybody wanted to build all these things, but then they were pushed off.
Yeah.
So that goes back to,
that's a form of sabotage, I think, too, because they could have let like Vitalik build whatever he was building on Bitcoin. They didn't.
So I can kind of get it, but then it's kind of like karma, right? If you're dictatorial, then people will start their own dictatorship and resist you. So I think that's why I'm conducive to BSV, because I basically see all the blockchains like centralized dictatorships that are kind of like run by companies. Whereas BSV is the first one to run itself like a nation state, to where they're like, we are not the ones in control here. We just want to lock the rules in and to invite as many people as possible to come to our country and add value. and we will benefit off of that from transaction fees, and
Right.
that's the correct alignment of incentives.
Right.
So yeah, so then basically the miners are incentivized to maximize transaction fees, and transaction fees is the proxy of valuable economic activity. So they are the ones that have the that are aligned best with the success of Bitcoin.
Right.
And these other ones, it's all about the interests of the developers and them
Right.
taking power. And then
Yeah.
with that, it creates a very kind of narrow space to have like economic, because you always have to ask the developer to do something. That's like I feel like it's a little bit like China, right? Where it's like you always need to ask the permission of the state to,
Do
kind of
almost
do
anything
something, and
there.
also,
Yeah.
yeah, and also you don't know if the communist regime is going to change the rules or
Mm-hmm.
seize your company or use you as like a prop for their
Yeah.
for their own interests. And
Yeah, and
then if you
if you
can't,
fall afoul of them, you could, just
yeah,
die or get the axe. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, that's the same thing with Ethereum, right? So
Yeah.
basically, the DAO hacker pissed off the leaders, right?
Right.
And the
Yeah.
leaders were like, "Off with your head," or like, "We're gonna like, yeah, like steal your money and like kick you off the platform."
Right. And that
And
kicked
then
off
yeah,
all the Ethereum Classic people too, because they were totally against like the rollback. So they kind of
yeah,
killed two birds with one stone, kind of like.
yeah. So yeah, so I think, yeah, I think we kind of really kind of reiterate or kind of hit home the correct kind of mental model that you should be using for
Mm.
um, um, blockchains. But let me go off to like another point that I was trying to make is how so I'm not a developer, I don't, have my own business,
Mm.
a Bitcoin business or anything. But then how I was able to realize that BSV was the real deal without being able to completely understand the technical and economic arguments, because I use a lot of shortcuts. I'm kind of lazy, and
Mm.
the reason why I I was paying attention to them was because that people were fighting and putting money where their mouth is, which is like a very strong signal. Like I think Bitcoin is valuable is because everybody fights over it. If like nobody's fighting over your crypto or just fighting over whatever you have in general, what you have is not very valuable. So the fact that people are fighting over it means that there's something of value here. So then I, kind of went over to the BCH and just kind of followed, the discussion and the debate. And, I was, listening to all the debates, and then, in order to settle it, they had the hash war. And basically, instead of talking or, using, proof of social media,
Mm.
people were actually burning millions of dollars to signal that they really believe in this implementation. And I think to all the people out there that kind of want help or trying to make the decisions, is that I look at these behaviors or these like signaling mechanisms, and I know talk is not very expensive. It doesn't take a lot of energy,
Mm.
so it's not a very reliable signal. To me, the reliable signal is people actually spending money, because that's very hard. You can't fake that. And the fact that, yeah, because they were putting their money where their mouth is to fight for this, mean that they're very serious people.
Right.
And I always had this suspicion that like, like I thought BCH, you guys were kind of like scammy or like not legitimate or professional or
Mm.
whatever. But when I actually like, looked at the people that were in there, there was a lot of billionaires
Yeah.
in that side, right? So you had Jihan Wu and Bitmain. You had Roger Ver, which I'm sure, if he's not a billionaire, he's, close. You had, Calvin Ayre, who's also, a
He's
billionaire.
the most legit one because he has
Yeah,
like like business from gambling, so he's like legit like
Yeah.
outside of
Yeah.
crypto billionaire. So
Yeah. And then, Craig was, early and stuff. So, he was a billionaire. So it was like, these guys have proved, that they know what they're doing, but also they have a lot of skin in the game
yeah,
by doing this. Whereas, somebody who doesn't have that much money, if it fails, you're like, oh, whatever.
yeah,
But
like
these
all
guys
the
have
core
a lot
devs,
of money on
some
the
of
line.
them were saying they didn't even have Bitcoin. It's like, what the
Yeah.
hell? So it's like,
Yeah. So to me, that was a signal. And also I did a tweet about this where I said like I only trust billionaire presidents, and I'm kind of like supporting Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, and basically it's kind of trolling where I don't tell you my reasoning, but I think the real reason is that basically, well, people that have become billionaires in business, they're obviously very capable people. They're making very good decisions and dealing with reality. But also at the same time, they have the right incentives to where they're already rich. So then they can like look at the long term and like make decisions, for the long term. And let's say it does, benefit their businesses in a certain way. But I think that's okay because I think what benefits their business will benefit businesses in in general. And also, if you are a billionaire, you can't. It's very hard to co-opt you, right?
yeah, exactly.
It's having like fuck you money or whatever. So
Yeah.
like my thing is like all these volunteer core devs, they're very susceptible to being influenced
Yeah.
because they're not independently wealthy. And then something like Bitmain will come along and say, hey, we'll pay you $1 million or a lot of money
Yeah.
to start implementing changes the
Yeah.
changes that we want. Whereas like Craig or Calvin or whatever, they're independently wealthy and they're not going to be bribed by like a nation state or whatever because like Craig says, he has more money than a lot of countries and stuff like that. So yeah, so those are kind of like shortcuts that I used without understanding, the details of the arguments to say that, these guys are, these guys are serious. Yeah, and it's just it's kind of like skin in the game. And then when I heard all the other arguments that were consistent, that kind of that just kind of like drove the point home for me.
Yeah.
And you can empirically see it. Like I'm faulting this Unwriter guy. This
Yeah,
guy
he's
is like
amazing,
creating
right?
like he's creating like application after application after
Right, yeah.
application. And then that just goes to show you, all right, like people aren't worried about the protocol changing anymore. Now they're
Right.
confident to, build
They can
stuff,
be creative now. Yeah, they know what they're
Yeah.
working with. Yeah. And
Yeah. Yeah.
Unwriter is one of the only devs like outside of Nchain devs that like Craig really respects. He's like, yeah, we
Mhm.
got this guy. We don't need any of these other devs. Like we
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
need
It's like,
one Unwriter is better than like, 20
so
other devs. Like
that's the whole, the whole 10x engineer kind of thing, right? It's
yeah.
like in engineering world, like a exceptional engineer will be 10 times better or 10 times more productive than a mediocre
Yeah.
engineer. And I also made this other tweet that I think we talk a lot too much about how big a community is, because in my opinion, I think just I look at it empirically, it's usually the outlier or like a small group of people that create like they're the ones that move the needle, right? Like
Right,
Satoshi in
yeah.
the beginning, or if Satoshi was a group of people, that
Yeah.
small group of the people really moved the needle or whatever. It wasn't like a socialist or a grand like plan thing where like everybody was involved in like creating this thing. So my thing is that there's going to be prolific developers, prolific entrepreneurs, and there's going to be a few of them that provide the majority of the value. So it's not about like sheer numbers, like an XRP army or a Litecoin army. It's
Yeah.
about identifying those exceptional people that will like that
Right.
will like drive the needle. The caveat of that is that you want to be open because you don't know who that person is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then you need to have a wide net, and then eventually it'll filter out, and then yeah, those people will add most value. One thing I want to talk about is how to avoid incentivizing the wrong behavior, because I think one thing that I've noticed is that having a permissionless protocol, you can have overlap between the builders, the users, and the holders or the investors.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that when all those things are overlapped, because in a normal business, the investors and the customers are usually different people,
Yeah.
right? So then the businesses build things for non-investors that actually want to just like use a product, and the investors get rich off of that. But what happens is that there's just like this circular thing to where the investors are their builders, and they start building things for other investors. And then there's like this escape velocity thing to where like they get stuck in this like loop, and they never escape into the real worlds of like non-Bitcoin or non-crypto users. And basically what they're doing is they're incentivizing more people to kind of like join the Ponzi and hold so they can dump.
Right. But I
So
see this is where like BSV or Bitcoin SV is shining, because we're not asking people to join Ponzi. I never ask people to invest. I want people to build. I want services.
Yeah. And I think I may be complicating it too much, because I think my initial thought was that
I'm gonna get some water, but you can continue. Yeah.
Sure. So then maybe people in BSV shouldn't hold BSV, because that creates a perverse incentive to, instead of building a revenue generating business, just to attract new people to pump your coin so you can dump it, which is not long-term sustainable behavior.
Yeah.
So then I guess my controversial proposal was that to discourage people holding BSV.
Yeah.
And to just build businesses on top of BSV and start earning it.
Yeah, I don't want people to obsess too much with holding. So I love like kind of like sideways market where it's not really going up or down, because it kind of just turns all those people away. Like,
yeah, I wonder if like Enchain has like a market making operation or whatever, they try to sell and buy. I don't know. But yeah, I think we can discourage here. But then I think I'm making it too complicated, and I think Daniel Kravitz is probably right to where that it's okay if people invest in BSV. If they're smart and they're rational, they will know what their long-term interests are, and they will incentivize the correct behavior, which is starting a business, a revenue-generating business on top of BSV, and then to earn fees as opposed to just getting noobs in to pump the price.
Right.
Yeah, so then like I've been on like the BSV like Telegram chats, and I think it's cool that they don't talk about the price much in general. So maybe it's just going to be maybe it's going to be just a organic culture thing, to where we emphasize revenue generating businesses and applications as opposed to just the price. Because I think if you just like focus on the price, then you'll have the kind of like the Ponzi like behavior in BTC, where it's just about promoting it and getting more people to buy.
Yeah.
And then pumping up the price, and then
it
and
builds
then dumping
these like crazy expectations, because like in 2017 people just thought it would just infinitely increase the price within even the same year. It's never made any sense at all, but they like people would believe that because there were people with Twitter handles putting like, oh, Bitcoin to 10K, Bitcoin to 30K, or like all these guys who of course scrubbed it off their handle now and trying to act like they never promoted it or something. But like that was like BTC, like Twitter was just full of that, and it was like sickening. And now like when I look at Twitter, at least I don't have any of this price stuff, because all these kind of like kind of people excited by Ponzi's are all gone now. So or very quiet now. So it's like really good atmosphere now for building and like actually learning about the technology. And I hope that people, you know, get like a better sense of technology now that all these like price hypers are gone.
Yeah. I mean, I think my friend said it as well, because I used to be one of those holders.
Right.
Just people are holding as well, and he basically says like, so this is what happens is that basically holders, they don't work, or they don't have a business that's actually generating profit.
Right.
So then they constantly have to sell their BTC in order to, you know, pay expenses. And then once, you know, the bubble happens, they always say they regret selling. But then it's like they had no choice, but they had to, right? But then the thing is that if you have a revenue generating business, or you work, then your Bitcoin stack actually grows.
Right. Yeah.
So you get the upside and you get to grow your amount as well. So like, yeah, those are the guys like really like hitting it rich. Whereas the people that are just like sitting at home and holding and hanging out like Twitter, like I am, your stack gets low, and then once it goes up, you have to sell even more, and then your stack just gets lower and lower and lower, and then over the long term, you end up like losing all your Bitcoin because you constantly have to sell. Whereas if you start a business or create an app that earns, you know, Bitcoin, you're able to grow your stack and grow the economy.
Because it's not, exactly. It's not only growing the stack, it's more about growing the economy. Because if you have a service, people use it, and there's like a sustainable like future for Bitcoin. If people don't use it, there's no future. There's going to be no value. So like the most important thing I think people have to not forget is that like right now this is a very niche thing. Like this is a system that hardly anyone really uses right now. There's cool stuff happening. I can see like Unwriter and other people building really cool stuff, but we just need a lot of people using it. We don't need people holding Bitcoin. There's nothing going to be gained by just a whole bunch of people holding it. People need to actually use it because this is how it spreads. Like if you use it and you tell your friend that, hey, like this is a cool game or something that uses Bitcoin and we can play it together. If you have some Bitcoin, then we can play. Like it's gonna spread more and more. And like yesterday, I was actually listening to the CEO of Epic Games, and he made Fortnite. I hope you know Fortnite, right? The game, it's pretty famous right now. Yeah. So he was saying that like when they built it, you know, they didn't have like didn't really know it would be such a success, but like what they wanted to do was like when they like were thinking about how to monetize it, they were like, well, firstly, we just need a lot of people using it, so we're gonna make this mode that's free so that people can invite their friends. Because like if your friend has the paid version of the game and they're using it right now, how do they invite the friends that are not in the game and might not be interested in shooters? Like how do we get those people involved? So we're gonna get those people involved by making the game firstly as inclusive as possible. So they're saying this like all the characters, they're not like the usual typical, you know, macho shooter guys, or that, you know, all the women are in bikinis or something. It's not like that kind of like that's kind of like the typical trope in video games. They're saying that, okay, we have all these kind of unique and weird characters that are just themselves, and we're gonna make this mode that's free so everyone can play it. Even your friends that don't like shooters, they're gonna try this and they're gonna like it. And it's just like succeeded for them because they had that vision in mind that it was like something that should be for everyone. And I think that's really key to what Bitcoin should be too. Instead of thinking like, oh, like we're gonna make this really hard to use Lightning thing that's off chain and it's not even Bitcoin. Like we trying to think of all the ways people can use Bitcoin without even thinking about it being Bitcoin. Like, so kind of like what Handcash is trying to do, trying to take all the addresses away, trying to make it as simple as possible. You just send it to someone's like username, basically. So sending money between usernames, like finding ways to make it as approachable as possible is actually what Bitcoin is about.
Yeah. I mean, it's business 101. I mean, you just want to make your product as convenient pleasant to use as
Right. Yeah.
as possible. But then I think BTC got hijacked by all this ideology
Yeah.
and engineering ideology in addition to economic ideology
Yeah.
to where it turned into a religion. To where as long as you respect the ideology, then the people at the top of the hierarchy get to maintain power. Um, so again, to be fair, I think this is where the Ethereum community got it right, to where they saw this problem having in Bitcoin, where they weren't very inclusive. They were just like only about people that thought like them. And they were more kind of open and inclusive to allowing everybody to join and being, yeah, just being welcoming and not being mean and what not. I think that their intentions were good, but I don't think their execution was good.
Mm.
Also, at the same time, I think there were ignorant people that were just trying to cater to noobs to get in, because that's the downside of being inclusive. And one example of this is when I went to a BTC steak dinner,
Hmm.
and
So like steak,
basically,
they don't eat anything else, right?
yeah. So I went, paid, I went there. It cost like a couple $100 a plate.
Oh my God.
And yeah, so you go and then you pay all this money and then you go there and like most of them were just like men and
Yeah.
they're like eating like meat and stuff like that. And then everybody like believes in the same thing. They're all like hardcore like libertarians and stuff like that. And like I think there's somebody who like worked at Coinbase and I guess he didn't like me and he got drunk and he kept on asking me like he kept on like running up to me, like he was like just like kind of like verbally like accosting me. He's like, "Are you a faggot? Are you a faggot or something
What
like that?" And I was
the
like, "Dude, like,"
hell? Oh my
I was
God.
like, "Dude, like
What?
leave me alone or whatever."
Jesus
But
Christ.
then I didn't really feel like I felt like a very like adversarial or just like a very like adversarial environment. And then I was just
Yeah.
like, I don't know if like these people are the type of people that I want to be around.
Right.
And basically just this whole thing is just like reminded me of like elitism. It's like you guys think you're the new elites or something. It's like,
Mm.
yeah, we're gonna like, sit in this private room and like drink like expensive wine and like eat like filet mignon. And I'm like, you guys are like aspiring like global elites. Like that's the type
Right.
of
Yeah.
shit that we do. And I'm like, well, what about vegetarians? What about people with Lyme disease? Like, what if they don't want to eat
Right.
meat? Right? It's like, why are you trying to impose this meat, like
Yeah.
this carnivory, this very niche culture
Yeah.
in top of Bitcoin? Like, this has nothing to do with Bitcoin. I know it's edgy and contrarian or whatever, but then like, and then I went to another barbecue in like San Francisco, and it was the same like meat thing. And this is the type of person I am. I bought a
Yeah.
tray of steamed vegetables
Uh-huh.
just to bring it. And then
Right.
the thing was like nobody touched it, but there was chips there, and then people
Yeah.
were eating chips. And then my thing
Well,
is just like you guys, what you're doing is you're just signaling allegiance to a tribe,
yeah. What's
just
wrong with
signaling like
vegetables?
loyalty.
What do they have against
Yeah,
vegetables?
yeah. But then the thing was just like you guys are idiotic. Like if you make this the culture of Bitcoin, you are going to
Uh-huh.
turn off like
Exactly.
hundreds of
Everyone.
millions of like vegetarians in like India, right? Like I want vegetarians in India to be using Bitcoin. If you make like meat a like
Right.
requirement, eating meat like a requirement
Right.
to be there, it's just retarded. So then, um, and then I noticed like people in BCH they try to like actually have a conversation with me
Uh-huh.
or like whatever, and like we would like actually like talk about things and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, and when I heard about inclusivity, I was like, oh, this is like SJW, just like BS or whatever, and Bitcoiners know best. But yeah, in reality, like it's not like a virtue signaling argument.
Mm.
There's 7.5 billion people in the world. They do
Yeah.
not share all your politics, or your dietary practices.
Right, yeah, because it's like
So
global money system. It's nothing to do with
yeah,
meats. It's nothing to
yeah,
do with even vegetables, anything. It's just like money, and it needs to be approachable. Like, why are people
yeah.
making themselves less approachable?
Yeah, yeah, and basically it's because it's turned from an actual like economic protocol to where, you want the world,
Using
included,
it, yeah,
to a tribal religious hierarchy to where there's
yeah,
a limited amount of people in, and your incentive is to be at the top of the hierarchy,
yeah,
because there's no new value being created.
right.
So yeah, so like yeah, I noticed like all these things. Yeah, I noticed like all these things happening, and it just like it didn't yeah, it didn't line up with me. So yeah, so and also another thing was that like when I went to like these dinners, everybody like treated me like I like was like a conquering like hero or whatever. And when in reality, I was like, I'm not a dev, I'm not a miner, I don't like own a business. Like I don't, all I do is just like I just like look at what people are saying, and I just like
Tweet
repeat
it.
the arguments or just like attack other people that like don't agree with the arguments. And I'm like, if you are like treating me like I am the authority here, and I know I'm not an authority, then that means you don't know what you're talking about either. So that means
Yeah.
it's like blindly, like nobody here knows what the fuck is going on. And that was another like test that I had, because it was like, yeah, like I'm not very like well versed, and I don't even actually like build on or touch like the protocol or whatever. And then people are like
They're looking to you. They're
elevating me at the
hunters, right?
higher the
Yeah,
hierarchy.
right.
And basically it was because like I was the most like vicious and like unapologetic about like
Right,
spreading the ideology.
right, right.
And in order for you to rise to the hierarchy, you have to be the most vicious and unapologetic in attacking other people that don't agree with the ideology. And the more intolerant you are, the more value, the more status that you have in the
Yeah.
in the hierarchy. So
It's
yeah, it's just like all these things that I witnessed firsthand, and also I was guilty of partaking in, that made me realize that this is not rational for
right.
a business or
Yeah.
for an economic protocol.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing with Bitcoin, because it's not exactly a business, so there's no one kind of face representing it. But then people try to seek out a face. So they might say, "Oh, I'm gonna look for Kevin, or I'm gonna look
Mm-hmm.
for this other guy to represent who I think Bitcoin is represented by." And
Mm-hmm.
people shouldn't look at it like that. And that's why it's always kind of frustrating. People say, "Oh, it's like Craig coin or something." And he's just running his own, business and his own like motives for doing it. And of course, like, he's making a lot of patents that are like available for BSV, but that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean he owns the protocol. He doesn't own the protocol. No one does. And people shouldn't try to just seek out a face to say, "Hey, this is the person I go to and I want to find out this thing." It should be more like you said about the Constitution. It's like written
Yeah.
into stone, basically. Like, this is Constitution, and you can either follow it and accept it and live on this lands
Yeah.
together, following the Constitution, or not. And that's basically what it is. And that's what BSV represents for me too. Like, it's just that the protocol is set in stone. You want to follow this or not. So
Yeah. So let me give you this insight. I think I have is that, so people talk about decentralized versus centralized, right? So then they'll make the argument that Craig Wright is the leader of BSV. So my thing would be like Craig Wright is a little bit more like Ron Paul, or like a constitutionalist, to where they are not saying worship me. They're saying that let's go back to our roots and worship the rules of the Constitution. And it's so basically like when in any type of decentralized system, you don't worship a human being, you worship a set of principles or ideas.
right.
So the Constitution, we don't worship a president, we are supposed to
Right.
worship the Constitution and
Right.
be loyal to the Constitution, so the
Right,
president
yeah.
doesn't have too much power. And then when the president violates the Constitution, then you're supposed to remove him.
Yeah, we hold them responsible for
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yes. Kind of same thing with religion, right? So it's basically
Mm-hmm.
it's the Bible or the word or the rules and the principles that
Right.
is supreme here.
Yeah, it's not the priest.
And then
Yeah.
Yes. So then basically that empowers everybody to read it and then have their own interpretation of what is the correct implementation of the Bible is.
Right.
So it empowers individuals, and then whoever gets the best results is probably the person that has the best understanding.
Right.
And then with BSV, they put the white paper or the economic protocol as the thing that is supreme.
Yeah.
And then if you are profitable or whatever, then that will be a proof that you are the one that's abiding by the economic principles. And if you just step out from the bigger picture, like people would, like when I was in the BTC camp and I said like I held all forks, people would assume me, accuse me of being a BCH shill. Right. But I said like, well, I can hold all forks, but not necessarily support BCH. I just support the idea of people forking off and then pursuing their own interpretation of what Bitcoin is. Mm-hmm. And then if you think about it, the fact that nobody in Bitcoin blindly follows one leader, right? Like nobody blindly follows Adam Back, nobody blindly follows Roger Ver, nobody blindly follows Craig Wright, which means as a system, and if you look at the forks, Bitcoin is decentralized to where you have multiple competing forks, and those forks are not centralized. They're separate. They're competing against one another. So that means that Bitcoin's governance or whatever is decentralized, and it allows different implementations to compete. Whereas it like in Litecoin, like you can't fork Litecoin and survive because you don't have Charlie Lee on your side because he's like the real like supreme leader.
Yeah, there's these like figureheads, like kind of like Tron without Justin Sun wouldn't be followed either.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is that like Litecoin and Tron and Ethereum, they don't have an agreed upon principles or like founding document that everybody abides by.
Yeah.
So then if there is no founding document or principles for people to abide by and interpret on their own, then you just have to cede all your power to the leader.
Yeah, then it becomes cult-like and like guru-like. So you have this guru.
It's a dictatorship.
Right.
And here's the thing that you have to know, that no one person knows it. Not even Craig doesn't know everything, right? And that's why I think that's why like Craig is like kind of like very like difficult, and like he doesn't try to act nice, is that he wants to identify and include the independent thinkers that can accept the protocol and the truth of the protocol without liking him. Right?
Exactly.
Because if he's rational about his interests, he wants people that can tell him something that he doesn't know. Right? Because he's rational in that he knows everything. Whereas if you're a cult leader, you can't have anybody challenge your authority, because how can you be a leader or the leader of the cult or the
cult leaders being? They try to be nice, like they try to seem nice because they want to attract more followers. They don't want to attract people who are questioning them.
And that's the same thing. Like when I went to that stake dinner, people like were treating me like I was like a conquering hero, and I'm like, and they want to like shake my hand and like get my autograph and stuff like that. And basically, I was like, if you want to help me, if you really want to help me, tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me how I can be better.
Yeah.
Right? And it was like, like shaking my hand is like, that's just like to your benefit, and you're not benefiting me. You're just, just trying to tell me to, just to like help pump Bitcoin for you. And I'm like, no, I want to be right. So that's why it's important to get independent thinkers, smart people within the community that can give us an insight that we don't know, as opposed to only including people that agree with you, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
What's the use of having, another clone or another drone that doesn't bring any unique insight or value to them. They don't, outside of pumping the price. So I think it's important to be inclusive, but to do things where you can attract smart, independent thinking people that can add unique value and tell you if you're doing something wrong. Because Craig isn't right about everything, and if none of us ever questioned him, then there's a chance that he's going to screw up, and then the entire thing will be broken.
He welcomes questions. Like, the only people he blocks are people he thinks is like an idiot. It's not because of the question itself. He actually, answers and talks to a lot of people on Twitter, like surprisingly a lot. Yeah, just people kind of misinterpret, like, oh, he's blocking me because he doesn't like my, question. It's no.
Well, I think the thing is, in the beginning he blocked me, and I think he blocked anybody that called him like a scammer or like whatever.
Right.
So,
that too.
Yeah. As opposed to having like a
legitimate question,
legitimate question or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's the same with me. Like, I never block or mute people because I'm like, I want people to tell me when I'm wrong because I want to be right.
Right. Yeah. Though I mean, there's definitely people who don't really, even try to give you some insight into what you're doing wrong.
But then the thing is that
who are just annoying and not doing anything.
Yeah, but then the thing is that I like the Litecoin army, like they say all these like nonsensical arguments that make no sense. And the thing is that I just keep on doing that, and then the more you do it, the more people will realize that this is a cult. Right. I want stupid people to reveal themselves, and then smart people to reveal themselves.
Right.
There's really kind of no reason to block unless you're trying to protect your reputation as an all-knowing
your personal
person.
Time and space. Sometimes some people just take too much time and space, and they're not really giving anything to you. It's like kind of one-way relationship where they kind of abuse you, but then you don't get anything out of it. So then it's just like it's kind of pointless, and that's
right. I think I got maybe like 10 more minutes. I have one more question for you. Like, how did you get into Bitcoin? What's your
into Bitcoin? Actually, like I first I heard about Bitcoin, I think from Wired or something. I read about Bitcoin on Wired magazine. That was a pretty long time ago. I don't know, 2012 or something like that. At some point, I had a laptop and I tried to mine Bitcoin with some software, like some pool software. That's where I started. But then for a long time I was just kind of loosely following Bitcoin. I wasn't really involved in forums or anything like that for a long time. And I also got my friend really into Bitcoin for some reason. I was just always interested. I was always telling him about Bitcoin. And then suddenly at some point he was super into Bitcoin. He's like, hey, I'm just putting all my extra salary into Bitcoin and blah blah blah, and just kept in touch with him now and then. And then he also told me about this hackers conference, and he said it's really cool and you should try to go and stuff. So I really only kind of really followed it more intensely kind of 2016 and 2017, and then that's when I realized hey, what the hell happened? Because for a lot of years I was just everything's going fine in Bitcoin, everything's just it's a currency, people using it, and I was really happy about that, but I wasn't anyway interested in investing so much. I was cool, this is a cool technology. And I come back and it's hey, wait a second, what's happening? Because it's they don't want to scale anymore. What's happening? I'm I got so panicked and frustrated. I was oh my god, what am I gonna do? I was reading all this stuff, and then I just felt okay, I have to go on Twitter, and I was just started to follow these people on Twitter. And the thing was that in 2017 there was basically only a few accounts or something, kind of kind of some vague dissonant voices that were talking about splitting away from BTC, or just criticizing what BTC was doing wrong. And then at some point that was about to accumulate in a fork, and that was the time I was hey, I kind of want to join this movement, because it's going to take Bitcoin onto the right track. I was really concerned that Bitcoin was just flying off the rails. So that's when I got really involved with tweeting. That's why no one saw me tweeting before. I had a really old Twitter account. It was probably from I don't know, 2000 I don't know, 14 or something like that. Yeah, and then it just kind of came on. So I'm like not surprised that people thought it was some kind of shill or some fake account. It's just like totally got so like impassioned to defend what I thought was, like perfect system that was going right all the time when I wasn't, paying attention. And they come back and it's like, what the hell happened? That's what happened.
So I have an intuition. Answer this.
Yeah.
Before getting into Bitcoin, were you in like Austrian?
No,
or a liberty.
not.
See, that's the thing. That's the thing is that I think that's why you were able to think independently.
Right.
Because Bitcoin was kind of taken over by, this sound money Austrian ideology, and it sounds like you come from like the gaming community.
Yeah, I come from like kind of tech. I was just like really into computing and technology, and it's just like that's all I saw it as something really cool. And then
yeah. See, so that is kind of like evidence to why you need to be inclusive to diverse people from different backgrounds, because they may be able to identify a blind spot that you don't have.
Right, yeah. They're gonna see it from a different angle. And I think like a lot of the anarchists have a very like kind of blind spot for what Bitcoin is. Because they kind of see it from their lens. They're like, this is gonna support anarchy. And they don't see it from any like normal kind of like a use lens. There's like anarchy.
Yeah, so like I have this thing that it says like anarchists are just like aspiring fascists.
Right.
So basically, it's kind of like a will of power thing, like a Nietzsche thing, to where like they're out of power and they want to destroy the system in order for them to be at the top of the
like instead of like
the hierarchy.
Fixing or improving like current laws or something, they just want to take it all down, and they think that's gonna somehow solve everything.
But the thing is that it's not about freedom; it's about them being on top and them being in power.
Yeah.
So when you kind of see this behavior of like these people who are supposed to be all about like decentralization and freedom and like empowering other people, but they're being very like dictatorial and suppressing dissent, then you can like really see what these people's like intentions really are. Like for me, like I really do not really care about power. I just want like to enable people to just like do cool shit that I can benefit off of because I'm lazy. Like I don't want to lead. Yeah, I just want to like I just want to like there's like 7.5 billion people in the world now, and I want them all to contribute and like make something because I don't want to do all the work myself.
Right.
Like a dictator wants everything to be done their way and they want to do it themselves. It's like no, there's 7.499999 billion people in the world. I want them enable them to work and add value so I can use all the cool stuff that they're making. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So my phone's about to die, and this is it started off a little bit rough, but it sounds like we agree on a lot of things.
Yeah, it was really great talking to you and catching up. I think I've, followed your account for a while, and I think we have agreed on there too, but it's nice to kind of come together and talk about, Bitcoin from these both sides and like multiple sides, like, and hopefully the viewers get an opportunity to understand, Bitcoin from that angle too, so that's not like BTC is the only like is Bitcoin kind of thing. It's more like Bitcoin is whatever the constitution is. Bitcoin is the white paper. Bitcoin is like what was planned, and who can implement that the best.
Yeah, and you just let the revenue generation just like be the proof of of your competence. And and also to anybody watching or commenting, like Reina and I, like we're not authorities here. We're just
it's just two people chatting.
So if you think we're wrong on something, then like let me know because I want to learn.
Oh, it's great having you, and have a good night.
Cool.
Good day. Good day over there.
Glad we got this live stream thing going.
All right, great.
Bye.
Yeah. See ya.